Hello everyone, my name's Dave, and this is part 4 of a video series where I'm going to show you how to create a tower base defense game 100% from scratch using C++ and SDL2. So far, a spawning and pathfinding system have been set up that allows enemy units to be added automatically, move towards the center of the base, and disappear when they get there. In this part, I'm going to upgrade the art because it looks okay, but could use some improvements. To start, I decided to draw some better art for the images. Unlike before, I added shadows because I feel like it really makes them stand out more and look a lot better. However, I decided not to do anything for the flow field because it's more for test purposes rather than the final version of the game. The current size of the tiles are 48 pixels by 48 pixels, and I felt that it was a bit small for the game. Therefore, when I drew the new images, I made them 64 pixels by 64 pixels. This means that this needs to be reflected in the game. The tile size is set in the game class's header, so I switched it there. Okay, let's run the game and see what problems this has caused. Well, there are a bunch of them. The units are too small, the walls are too small, the spawners are the right size, but the flow field is behind them, and there's a border around the level on the bottom and right sides. Let's start by fixing the units. If we take a look at the code that draws them, it should show some clues about how to fix them. The draw function uses a variable called size to determine what size they should be drawn. Therefore, at first glance, we could say, well, I guess all that needs to be done is to change that, and the problem should be solved. It's defined at the top of the file, so let's go ahead and change it and see what happens. Notice that it's a float value that is relative to the size of the tile. This means that, for example, a value of 1 would mean that it's the same size of the tile, which is 64 pixels now. I measured the actual image, and it happens to be 44 pixels by 44 pixels. So that means that the size should be 0.6875. I'm also going to slow them down a bit so that they are easier to see. Let's try a speed of 1.5 tiles per second. When the game is run, you can now see that the size of the unit matches the spawner, so that's good. However, there is a very large gap between the units now, and they tend to be very far away from the walls. The reason why this is happening is because of the addition of the shadow to the unit's image, because it added a border around it. Right now, the size represents the size that the image will be drawn, as well as the size of its bounds that's used to calculate the spacing between the units. Therefore, to fix this, these sizes will need to be separate. I'm going to start by switching the size to be 0.48, which is similar to what it was before. However, it is still slightly bigger because the unit is now a bit larger. I'm going to modify the code that draws the image. To start, I'm going to get the width and height of the image. I'm then going to modify the rectangle that defines where it will be drawn. The X and Y position will now be set to the center position on the unit in pixels, minus half the image's width and height respectively. And the width and height will be the width and height of the image respectively. Notice how the only part that still uses tile size is the position because it's relative to the size of the tiles. When the game is run, you can see that they are still being drawn at the correct size, but they are now closer together. Very nice. Next, let's work on fixing the walls. The code that's responsible for drawing them is in the level class's draw function. Notice that they are scaled by tile size to fit the size of the tile. This worked well previously. However, like with the unit, the wall now has a shadow, which adds a bit of a border around it. Therefore, the code is going to have to be modified in a similar way. Like before, I'm going to get the width and height of the texture. For the position, it's going to be the upper left-hand corner plus half the size of the tile to get the center position. After that, half the width and height of the image will be subtracted. This is the same thing that was done for the unit. However, the code is slightly different because the unit's position already defined its center, whereas the code that was here was for the upper left corner of the wall. The width and height will just be the width and height of the wall image. When the game is run, you can see how much better the wall looks now. Not only is it being drawn at the correct size, however, the shadows look right as well. They're always drawn behind the wall and never on top. This is because the wall tiles are drawn row by row from left to right, starting with the top row and ending with the bottom row. You could always change the order on your own to see the difference if you want, but I won't do that here. The next issue to work on is the spawners. They're the right size, but the flow field is drawn behind them. Because the flow field is temporary for test purposes, rather than the final version of the game, I'm going to comment out the code that draws it and change the comment to indicate that uncommenting the code will draw the flow field. When I run the game, you can see that the background is white, which looks a bit weird. However, everything else is drawn correctly and looks good. I'm going to add some code that creates a checkered grid with light gray and darker gray tiles. All it does is loop through the level, select the correct color based on the tile's position, and fills a rectangle at that position. When the game is run again, you can see how the background is looking much better now. However, there's still a border on the bottom right-hand corner. Therefore, I'm going to go to the main.cpp file and change the size of the window to fix it. Previously, the size of the tile was 48 pixels by 48 pixels, which meant that a window size of 720 pixels by 720 pixels was perfect because it divided evenly by 48. However, because the tiles are now 64 pixels by 64 pixels, 720 doesn't divide evenly. Therefore, I'm going to switch it to be 960 by 576. When I run the game again, you can see how the border is now gone and everything looks quite nice. I'm going to quickly uncomment the code for the flow field and see how it looks. It looks like there's something wrong. It's drawn on top of the grid, which is good. However, a bunch of tiles are missing. The reason why is that there's a small typo in the code for the Y position of the tiles, where the count is divided by tile count Y, when it should be divided by tile count X instead. Previously, tile count X and tile count Y were both the same, so everything was fine. However, because the level is now rectangular, they are different. When the game is run again, you can now see that the flow field is being drawn correctly. Of course, for the final version of the code, I'm going to leave the code that draws the flow field commented out. So you can now see that all the art has been upgraded to look a lot nicer. It includes shadows and a nice checkered background. Since this is a tower defense game, it does need turrets that shoot the enemy units. However, this is a good place to stop for this video, and I'll start working on that in the next one. All the source code is available on my website, link is in the description. I've also got a bunch of other games, code, and tutorials on my channel and website, as well as a course where I create a Falling Sand platformer game 100% from scratch. Feel free to check those out if you're interested. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you in the next one.